They always say letters are for the dead. So when I found hers handwritten, sealed in violet wax tucked between the folds of an old academic journal I hadn't touched in years, I thought maybe it was a mistake, or a trick of memory, or maybe just my guilt trying to claw its way back through paper and dust. The envelope smelled faintly of smoke and lavender, just like her. "My dearest Rowena," it began. "By the time you read this, I will be a name in a quiet room and nothing more. But if you remember anything of me, anything true, you'll come back to Halberd Hollow. Come back for the wake. Come back for what's underneath." And then scrawled in a jagged hand at the bottom, "Don't let the lantern go out." That line hit me like a cold breath on the back of my neck. The kind of phrase that shouldn't mean anything. But it did. Somewhere deep, it did. I reread it 4 times. Then again, the loop of her R's, the slant of ink that dipped just slightly at the end of each sentence. It was her, not a fake, not a dream. 15 years is a long time to pretend a place doesn't exist. But Halberd Hollow, it always knew how to find its way back into my bones. It wasn't the letter that unsettled me. It was the silence before it came. I hadn't spoken her name out loud since the night I left. And yet she knew exactly when to reach through the fog, as if something about this moment, this exact week, was preordained. I stared at the letter under the grey morning light of my London apartment. Rain tapped against the window like a slow metronome. Everything else in the room, the books, the ticking clock, even the kettle felt too loud, like the world was holding its breath. And in that breath I felt it, that pull. The weight of a memory I didn't invite curling through my chest like smoke from an old fire. I remembered the smell of her study cedar old typewriter oil red wine, the way her lantern would cast slow trembling shadows across the stone walls, always lit, always swinging slightly even when no wind touched it. "Never let it go out," she'd say, looking at me over her shoulder. Some things need their watchlight even after dark. I never asked what she meant. I was too young then, or too afraid. Now I couldn't help but wonder what had she been watching for, and who had taken over when I ran. I packed slowly, almost mechanically. A single duffel bag. No questions. Just the shape of the key still etched in my memory and the sound of her voice buried beneath a dozen layers of doubt. I didn't tell anyone I was going. By the time I reached the train station, dusk was bleeding into the sky. The ticket clerk didn't even blink when I asked for Halberd Hollow. Just slid the stub forward like I was another ghost heading home. The train groaned as it pulled from the platform. London slipped away, replaced by fields swallowed in fog and towns that forgot how to be found on a map. I sat by the window watching my reflection shift in the glass. Older now, sharper around the eyes, but still me. Still her niece. Still the girl who once cracked military code under fluorescent lights and silence. Still the girl who once ran from a house that kept too many secrets in the basement. The conductor paused when he passed me, gave a glance I couldn't read. "You heading there for the wake?" he asked low. I nodded. He said nothing more. Just tipped his hat, muttered, "Best keep your eyes open," and moved on. I didn't sleep. Just watched the fog gather outside, thick and low, until the train seemed to be drifting not through countryside, but through some other realm entirely, like the hollow had pulled the land itself into its orbit. And when the platform finally appeared, wooden rotted slightly at the edges, lantern already lit at its post, I felt something twist beneath my ribs. Not fear exactly, recognition. The hollow hadn't changed. The shadows still leaned in too close. The trees still whispered things they shouldn't know. And somewhere out beyond the fields I knew the old house waited. Cold. Watching. The lantern would be lit. For now. But I had no idea what would happen if it went out. The car stopped at the iron gate with a low mechanical groan. Moss clung to the stone pillars like it had never let go. Halberd House loomed beyond still standing like it had been carved from the fog itself. As the driver reached for the trunk, I stepped out the gravel crunching under my boots like brittle bone. The sky had turned that washed-out northern gray, the kind that swallowed shadows and made everything look like an old photograph left out in the rain. They'd cleaned the place, sort of. Ivy had been trimmed back windows unshuttered, but the air still tasted of damp wood and rusted secrets. The lantern above the main entrance flickered slightly, as if it too wasn't sure it should be burning. Inside it was quiet, too quiet. The hallway smelled like wax and old pages. A few dim sconces lit the path toward the main chamber, what used to be the ballroom back when my family still entertained illusions of grandeur. And then I heard it, the soft murmur of voices, dozens of them, controlled, low. Not the grief of mourning, but the measured cadence of people who knew better than to cry in public. I stepped through those double doors and stopped cold. They were everywhere, men in tailored coats with shoulders too straight, women with eyes like shuttered windows and hands that didn't quite tremble when they raised their glasses. No flowers, no weeping, just silence, silk, and an undercurrent of tension that crackled beneath the floorboards like fire behind a wall. Someone noticed me, a nod, a whisper. Then they looked away too quickly. But I saw their faces. I knew half of them by name. Caroline Temple, former MI6 deputy, disappeared after an internal leak scandal. Thomas Ashcroft retired counterintelligence from Canada, though his disappearance from Ottawa wasn't so much retirement as evacuation. And beyond them, the unmistakable profile of Admiral Hugh Lennox, once the hammer of the Atlantic-Sigint corridor. They weren't supposed to be here. None of them were. This wasn't a wake. It was a gathering of ghosts. What the hell is this? I murmured under my breath, stepping further in. No one stopped me. But they all watched in that quiet, practiced way. Not overtly, not impolite, just precise. The way you track a threat you're pretending not to notice. And there, framed between two tall windows, stood the portrait of my aunt. Painted young, far younger than I'd ever seen her. In uniform, unsigned. A shiver licked the back of my neck. "Miss Blake!" A man's voice clipped and smooth. I turned. An older gentleman, late 60s, sharp as glass and twice as cold. I couldn't place his name, but I recognized the posture Royal Signals, or maybe Intelligence Directorate. His gaze swept me like a scanner. "On behalf of all of us," he said, "we appreciate your return." "I wasn't aware this was a council meeting," I replied, a flicker of amusement barely. "Oh, it's not. Just old friends paying respects." I didn't answer. My fingers brushed the hem of my coat pocket, the letter still folded inside like a second heartbeat. He leaned in slightly. "Your aunt was vital to many of us. Her absence leaves certain gaps." "Is that what you call it now, absence?" That was when I saw Elias. He was across the room, framed in the glass reflection of the chandelier, speaking to someone too quietly for me to hear. His expression was unreadable. Calm. Controlled. But the second he sensed me, his jaw twitched. I hadn't seen him in years. Not since Riyadh. Not since I walked out on the operation that almost erased both our careers. He didn't smile, neither did I. He gave the barest nod. Almost imperceptible. And just like that, I knew he knew why I was here, or why I had to be. A woman in black passed between us, murmuring condolences that didn't match her eyes. I let the room settle around me, felt its walls press closer. My aunt's wake was a smokescreen. This wasn't grief, it was reconnaissance, and I'd just stepped into a trap dressed like a homecoming. The lantern in the hallway flickered again, but it didn't go out. Not yet. There was something wrong with the way the wind moved in the east corridor. It was barely midnight. Most of the guests had left or vanished into their rooms, those who weren't still lingering in the parlor, whispering into crystal glasses and waiting for the other shoe to drop. The lanterns along the hallway guttered in their sconces, their flames pulling sharply toward the west. But I followed the east. The journal had been waiting for me on the windowsill of my old room. My aunt's room now. Leather-bound, worn at the edges, smelling of ink and burnt jasmine, the kind of book no one would have left there by accident. Inside the cover, a single line written in Latin, ubi lumen deficit ordo incipit. Where the light fails, the order begins. Beneath that, a series of notations, dates, initials, phrases written in half code. And beneath those, a familiar cipher, one I hadn't seen since Sandhurst long retired from active use. We used to call it the forget-me-not. Elegant. Unbreakable, unless you knew the poet it referenced. T.S. Eliot, my aunt's favorite. It took less than 20 minutes to crack the sequence. It wasn't a message, not exactly. It was an architectural overlay, a floor plan of this house, but not as it was now, as it had been before. Back when the east corridor didn't lead to a blank stone wall but to a staircase. I pressed my palm against the plaster at the end of the hallway. Nothing moved. I tried again, knocked once, then twice. Then I felt it under my fingers, the faintest change in texture. A groove. I pushed, and the wall clicked. A breath of cold air poured out like something exhaling after a very long sleep. There was a staircase. Narrow spiral, older than the house itself by the look of it. Damp stone curved downward into blackness. My flashlight flickered once before catching its beam, cutting a pale path down the steps. I descended slowly. Each step echoed like it was being swallowed. At the bottom, a door. Thick, iron-reinforced, but not locked. Just waiting. The hinges moaned softly as it opened. Inside, the air smelled like chalk and static. Dust hung in the light like ghost skin. The room was impossible. Ceiling arched like a chapel. Books lining every inch of wall shelved by language and era. Binders, maps, stacked crates marked with black military stamps half faded. There were 3 workstations, equipment long obsolete, but still running, humming faintly, as if their purpose hadn't yet ended. And in the center, a single desk. My aunt's desk. Neat. Precise. A lamp still burning low. I stepped forward. The first file I touched bore a seal I hadn't seen in over a decade, classified MOD internal, red-striped, unarchived. Inside, satellite photos, transmission logs, and metadata packets traced back to the early 80s. It was surveillance, but not of enemy states, not even of potential threats. It was domestic. Civilian communications, postal intercepts, financial behavior patterning, dating back 40 years. And it hadn't stopped. A second file newer, much newer. Names, IP logs, behavior tracking across phones, smart meters, doorbells. They were building predictive risk profiles on British citizens, categorizing them by volatility score, loyalty indicators, disruption potential. One name caught my eye. Mine. My breath stilled. There it was, in black and white, Blake Rowena. Observed divergence. Recommendation. Passive observation, unless direct action initiated. Classification latent. I felt something cold crack open inside my chest. She'd been watching me, or they had, all this time, and I hadn't even noticed. At the bottom of the folder, a label, Operation Rookshade. There was a flash drive wedged between pages. I slid it into the nearest terminal and waited. The system blinked to life, terminal green on black. No GUI, no fluff. Just a single directory, Rookshade Archive. Executive Orders. Expansion Phase 3. Integration with 5 eyes. Behavioral triggering. Suppression criteria. Complicity list. I clicked the last one. A list of over 400 names appeared. Not enemies, not targets. Participants, academics, politicians, media executives, corporate CIOs, people who had either stayed quiet or helped the operation stay hidden, people who were still in power. The room spun for a moment. I reached for the edge of the desk. This wasn't an old Cold War relic. It was alive, still breathing, still growing, still feeding off the silence of people like me, people who had once looked away. I should have left, reported it, dumped the drive and run. But something in me locked tight. My throat went dry, and then I heard it. A sound behind me, the door creaking open. I turned, fast hand instinctively moving toward the inner pocket of my coat. But it wasn't a stranger. It was Elias. He didn't flinch when he saw the screen, just stepped inside and closed the door behind him. I figured you'd find it, he said, voice low. I said nothing. You were always faster than the rest of us. Still nothing. He walked forward slowly, eyes scanning the room like someone returning to a buried altar. Like someone who had once believed in something and watched it rot. When did you know? I finally asked. He shrugged. When I saw the guest list. When I saw you. Why are they all here? His eyes met mine. To make sure it stays buried. I laughed once bitter. Doesn't seem to be working. Elias looked at the screen again. The file's still open. My name's still glowing in quiet accusation. She left this for you, didn't she? I nodded. Why? Because you're the last one who won't trade truth for comfort. He moved toward the console. For a moment, I thought he'd reach for the drive. But instead he picked up a worn photo wedged between the keyboard and the screen. It was of my aunt. Younger. Standing beside a man I didn't recognize, dark suit, blank face. The edges of the photo were singed. They started this thinking it would end wars before they began, Elias murmured. But it turned into something else. Something that watches everything and everyone just in case. And now, he looked at me again. This time there was no calculation in his face. Now it watches you. We stood in silence. Above us, somewhere in the house, the wind shifted. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure who the enemy was. But I knew the battlefield. It started here. With ink and silence and names, the house went dark at exactly 12:03 a.m. Not entirely just one light, the one that mattered. The lantern. It hung in the central hall like it always had, casting its warm, steady pulse over the heart of Halbert House. Always lit, always constant. Until it wasn't. I felt the moment it died before I saw it. A shift in the air, like pressure being sucked from the walls. Then the flash. Brief, silent, and the room beyond the stairwell folded into shadow. Elias froze beside me. That wasn't random, I said. No, he replied, his voice tight. That was a trigger. We bolted up the stairs, our footsteps muffled on the stone. My mind reeled through everything I'd seen in the archive, the terminal, the files, the fail-safes embedded in the floor plans. The lantern wasn't just a symbol. It was a switch. The second we reached the main hall, I saw it. In the corner behind the grandfather clock, a hidden panel had opened, one I'd walked past 100 times as a child. Now it stood ajar, humming with low mechanical breath. A terminal blinked inside. New, clean, active. Elias leaned over it. It's part of the fallback system. Your aunt must have hardwired the lantern's circuit into the archive. When it goes dark, it goes live. Goes live to what? He didn't answer, just pointed. The monitor pulsed with 6 colored signals, each labeled by room. Each room named after a tree. Ash, cedar elm, rowan willow yew. I stared at the names, a sick knot forming in my gut. These weren't random. They weren't architectural designations. They were call signs. My aunt had turned the house into a listening post, and each room tuned to a person. They've been mapped, I whispered. Each one. Elias nodded slowly. This house isn't just holding the archive. It's been watching them. In real time. We both looked up. Music floated in faintly from the parlor. Laughter. Crystal against crystal. They had no idea. They're still here, I said. We could trace the signals. Identify who's controlling what. Who's linked to Rookshade. Elias stared at me. There was something unreadable in his expression. Old doubt. New resolve. We'll need both of us, he said. I didn't move. You don't trust me, he added. No, I said. But I trust what's in that archive. And I trust that she left it open for a reason. He reached into his coat, pulled out a palm-sized device, an RF triangulator modified, probably illegal. We ping the signals, cross-reference them with activity in the rooms. Each signal's tied to a data stream surveillance authorization comms control. And then what? We tag them, build a digital trail. If we can push it to an external node, we can broadcast it. To who? His eyes met mine. To everyone. For a moment, we just stood there. 2 ghosts holding a lit match in a house full of dry history. Then I moved. We split up. The first signal came from the elm room. I slipped in through the servant corridor, heart hammering. A woman sat near the fireplace murmuring into a low-band transceiver disguised as an antique radio. Her voice smooth, precise, cutting through static. She didn't see me. I didn't give her time. I slid the triangulator under the table, let it ping once, then stepped out without a sound. The second signal ash room. A man in uniform, older, his eyes like cracked glass. On his lap a briefcase with biometric locks and something faintly glowing underneath. He never looked up. 2 more rooms, 2 more pulses, each one tighter than the last. By the time I reached the Rowan room, Elias was waiting. "It's done," he said. "All 6 mapped. Real-time data activity tied to the top layer of Rookshade. If we can link it to the archive, we can initiate a live extraction." I looked at the terminal again. The house's nervous system lit up in 6 tones, each a node, each a name. "Then do it," I said. "Send it." He hesitated. "I need your access code." I blinked. "What?" "Your aunt's terminal, her biometric key's only half. She paired it to you." "You knew that," she told me. "Said you were the contingency she'd never get to see." The lantern above us flickered once. I stepped forward, pressed my hand against the glass plate on the terminal. A soft tone answered. The system blinked green. And then movement. The data unfurled across the screen like a river bursting through stone. Names, protocols, wire transfers, internal memos tagged for ministerial eyes only, projected growth patterns, trigger lists, and the root index Rookshade Prime. The monitor asked root data to external channel Y. I looked at Elias. "Once it's out, there's no pulling it back." I hovered over the key. "No more shadows," I said. Then I pressed Y. The house held its breath, and somewhere deep in the structure an encrypted pulse fired toward an off-grid satellite loop one only she and I ever knew about. A soft tone confirmed transmission. "Signal's live," Elias whispered. "They'll know soon." I looked up at the dead lantern above. I think they already do. It started with the music, one note drawn out too long on the cello. Off-tempo, disguised. Then the chandeliers flared just slightly, like someone had flipped a switch behind the walls. When I stepped back into the ballroom, the air had changed. It was denser charged, as if the plaster itself had begun to sweat. The polished floor gleamed too bright under the lights. Every glass shimmered just a little too hard. Every gaze followed me now, no longer pretending. They knew, or someone had told them. Whispers bloomed in corners like black mold. A half-turn of heads, a tightening of shoulders. The kind of hush that only happens right before something breaks, and then Ashcroft moved. He cut through the crowd like a blade, still smooth, still charming, but with that military edge humming just beneath his skin. "Ms. Blake," he said, voice deceptively warm. "I'm afraid we need to have a word." I didn't flinch. "This isn't your jurisdiction anymore, Thomas." His smile twitched. "And yet here you are pulling threads you don't understand." Elias stepped beside me. I could feel the tension in him, coiled and trembling. He didn't speak, but the angle of his jaw told me everything I needed to know. They didn't expect him to stand with me. Ashcroft gestured subtly. 2 men near the bar moved, one toward the side door, the other circling behind. They weren't guests, not really, not anymore. "Let's not do this in front of everyone," Ashcroft murmured. "Why not?" I said louder this time. "Afraid they'll see what you've turned this place into." A few heads turned, and then she stepped forward, Caroline Temple in black velvet and pearls that glinted like teeth. "You've made a mistake, Rowena," she said calmly. "You think you've uncovered something buried, but what you've done is stumble into a machine older and deeper than you know." "Older, maybe," I said, "but not deeper, not anymore." The screen above the bar, once looping a slideshow of curated memories of my aunt, flickered. The feed stuttered, shifted. Then the archive appeared. Project Rookshade. Internal Complicity Index. Transmission in progress. The room stilled, and then chaos bloomed. Ashcroft's voice dropped to a growl. "How the hell did you get clearance?" "She gave it to me," I snapped. "You left her behind, remember? When she started asking the wrong questions." Elias raised a small remote thumb, hovering. "It's broadcasting now," he said. Internal satellite. Encryption keyed to Parliament relay. Try jamming it, you'll trigger a kill switch. Temple's expression faltered for the first time. Ashcroft didn't move. But the man behind me did. I felt the shift in the air, knew the moment a hand reached for something cold and fast. So I moved first. I turned, caught his wrist mid-draw, and slammed the heel of my palm into his elbow. He dropped. Hard. The gun skittered under the piano. The room erupted. Glasses fell. A chair overturned. Somewhere someone shouted something about protocol. But I didn't care anymore. This wasn't protocol. This was war. Ashcroft stepped forward again, slower now. Measured. Calculating the odds. Even if you leak it, no one will believe it. It'll get buried in noise. I looked him dead in the eye. Then I'll make it louder. I pulled the second drive from my coat. Backup, hardwired. I slammed it into the ballroom terminal. The screen pulsed. And then the data exploded. Names, dates, faces. Transfer logs. Surveillance grids mapped over British neighborhoods. Civilian profiles cross-referenced with private sector cooperation. And in bold at the top, Level 1 complicity. Active manipulators of civilian data flow. Their names were there. Temple. Ashcroft. Lennox. Half the room turned to stare. Ashcroft's mask cracked. You don't know what you've done. I took one step closer. Oh, I do. He looked at Elias. You really chose her over us. Elias didn't blink. I chose the part of me that still sleeps at night. The silence that followed was dense, electric, final. Temple turned on her heel and walked out. Ashcroft didn't. He stood there watching me, and I let him, because I wanted him to see. The lantern might have gone out, but I hadn't. They came just before dawn. No sirens, no chaos. Just quiet boots on gravel unmarked vans gliding through the morning mist like predators that didn't need to announce themselves anymore. By the time the sun broke over the fields, the ballroom was empty except for the shattered glasses, the overturned chairs, and the echo of names that could no longer hide behind polished smiles. I watched them take Ashcroft. No resistance. Just a tired tilt of the head, as if he knew this was always where it ended. Temple was gone. Lennox, too. Some had vanished into the fog long before the uniforms arrived. Some were still inside, pretending nothing had changed. But everything had. I stood at the edge of the terrace, coat tight against the wind, watching Elias disappear into one of the vans. Not with the arrested, not with the enforcers. Just gone. No words, no goodbye. Only a look through the window. It wasn't regret. It was surrender. A kind of quiet he hadn't worn in years. News broke by midday. Vague headlines, internal disruption in legacy intelligence circles. Digital archive leak sparks inquiry. No names, no details. Just enough to suggest something had happened and not enough for anyone to ask why. The signal had gone out. But it was already being reshaped, softened, redacted. Truth caught mid-flight and forced into a softer silhouette. The townspeople said nothing. They always knew the house kept secrets. They just never asked who they belonged to. An official came by that afternoon, offered relocation, witness protection if I wanted it, said I'd done my part. I told him no. He stared at me for a beat too long before leaving like I was something he couldn't catalog. I stayed, not because I had something left to prove, but because the dead don't guard themselves, and someone had to keep the lantern lit. The oil was still in the base of the lantern, thick old but usable. I stood in the center of the main hall floor, still marked by the memory of last night's scuff marks, a torn cufflink, one cracked crystal underfoot. Silence had settled over Halbert House again, but it wasn't the same silence. It listened now. I struck the match slowly. The flame caught with a soft gasp, and for the first time in years, the lantern glowed from the inside. Not because it had to, not because someone told me it should, but because I chose to light it. Its light spilled across the stone floor in ripples, warm, golden quiet. The kind of light that doesn't demand attention, only presence. It made the dust shimmer like memory. Downstairs, the archive had been opened, stripped of its encryption, replicated across secured drives, passed quietly to a network of independent researchers. Journalists, activists. Not all of them would believe it. Not all would act. But the silence was broken. That was enough. I left the ballroom doors open. Let the morning fog drift in through the threshold. Halberd Hollow was still there beyond the gates, half asleep, overgrown, suspicious by nature. But it had felt the shift too. The way a body knows the fever's broken even before the sweat fades. They didn't need to trust me. They only needed to know someone was still watching back. The sun crept higher, slow and cold and indifferent. I stood beneath the lantern hands still tinged with ash, and breathed in the quiet like it was the first real breath I'd taken in years. The light held steady, unflickering. I turned and walked toward the open door, not to leave but to wait. Because someone always comes back, and now someone would be here to meet them.